Hi everybody, welcome back to my LinkedIn Lives. Today we're at a different time, a special time, just for today. But yes, I'm Jasmine Navarro, certified wellbeing expert, working with educational institutions and companies, helping them support their family wellbeing challenges. And as you know, every week I interview different experts, and today I'm really excited for the second time to be interviewing Ger Graus. Hi, Ger. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Well, it's always a pleasure. It's always good to see you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for making me a first at 11 o'clock in the morning UK time. Fantastic.
No, thank you so much. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Right, I'll go really quickly. Grew up, was born in the south of the Netherlands many years ago. Went to school there, then became qualified as a teacher, and there's a whole story behind that. And then because there weren't any teaching jobs available, I stumbled across a job in Norwich, 1 year only, teacher of German. So in 1983, I got on a ferry and went to Norwich, and the 1 year is now 42 years or whatever it is.
Oh,
So
wow.
I must be entering the Guinness Book of Records at some point. And then what happens typically is I did 5 years in that school, absolutely loved every minute of it. And then you do this kind of weird thing in our schooling system, whereby if you're really good at something, we'll promote you away from what you're really good at. So I became a head of faculty, and then also quite flukishly became an advisor, moved to Manchester, introduced languages into primary schools, joined the dark side, became an inspector and a senior inspector, then saw the light again and became Anakin Skywalker again, and effectively left schooling and started to work in education and learning outside the classroom, set up the Children's University, was then approached to move to Tanzania first in the UK, then in London. We did global research and now speak at conferences, advise governments globally, and I was persuaded to write my professional autobiography through a different lens, which has just been published by Routledge.
Wow. So you've got a load of experience and qualifications and everything. So I'm so excited to be interviewing you today because I know you're full of so much knowledge and expertise. So you chose this title, which I guess you said is the same as your book, Lessons from a Life and Education Through a Different Lens. Can you tell us what that means and why you chose it for today?
Well, I mean, it's partly to do, of course, with the book, because I was kind of
Yeah.
persuaded. I don't like writing, so in the end, I was literally persuaded to write this thing, and
Oh, really?
yeah, I can't stand writing. It goes back to my school days and red pens and feeling inadequate, I think, I guess, right? And but in the end, I was kind of persuaded to do it, and people guided me through this, and with hindsight, I've quite enjoyed this. And what I started to discover quite quickly was that um, actually, a number of observations. One, we have no time or very little time to actually reflect on what we've done, because we're either too busy or other people tell us what we should be doing. So if you work in a
Oh,
classroom, you've got the national curriculum, and you've got your leadership team, and you've got Ofsted, and you've got the DFE, and you've got X, Y, and Z, and you just go ticking all these boxes. And by the end of it all, you never have the time to sit down and go, why am I doing this? In the nicest possible way. What difference am I making? Which bits
yeah.
work really well? What do I need to learn from other people? I incidentally think that particularly in England, that's a matter of trust. I think we have Ofsted in England as an inspectorate because the
Yeah.
government doesn't trust teachers, and that perhaps is another program. So, and then the other bit was that one of the things I learned through my working life was that when you have a schooling system, and schooling and education are distinctly different things. When you have a schooling system that is so obsessed with tick the box, teach and test
Oh,
numbers,
no.
and,
Yeah.
and where we only know our children by the data and not by insights, how can you personalize if your vista is so narrow. So one of the lessons learned, particularly through Children's University and Kidzania, was there are so many different ways and places to find out about our youngsters, whereby our foundation for planning and teaching becomes better and broader. But in order to do that, we've got to stop serving the system and we need to start serving the child. And effectively, so you need to look at it through a different lens.
Amazing.
And that's kind of where that came from.
Oh, it's so important, Ger, everything that you're saying. We're not robots, are we? Like you said, with these tick box exercises, it's just so robotic and so unnatural.
It's actually, if you, again, we don't get the time. I say at conferences, and I say to principals and head teachers quite a lot, is that you have all these training days. And actually, if you think about it as a school, as an organization, all your training days are taken up with the agendas of other people. There's a new Ofsted framework. The DFE wants this. We need to do the safeguarding policies, whatever it is. And actually, just take one day every year and give it to your teachers and say that on that day, they must talk about children. Not moan, but they must talk about children. And they must talk to other teachers about children, how to make yourself a better teacher, right? So I think I think those things matter greatly, and I think we've lost the plot. And if you think about it, and I feel very strongly about this, particularly at secondary schools. So we're now at a point where in some secondary schools, academies, where young people, for example, are not allowed to go to the toilet except for once a day. So there are incidences which have been reported in Schools Week and Times Education Supplement where a 14-year-old has wet themselves, for example, because they're not allowed. Now, I think we've crossed over into human rights issues here.
That's terrible, yeah.
And nobody's batting an eyelid. Everybody's kind of going, oh, well, that's just the way it is. Isn't that a strict school? And strict school? No, it's not. It's a school that has no regard. So if my youngest daughter 2 years ago was in school as a 17-year-old and she had a period, for argument's sake, and she was in one of those places she can go to the toilet once. Now, I think people kind of poo-poo that and go, oh, well, it is what it is. But actually, it says something about the mindset and the heart set some of those organizations are in. And for me, if you have an inspectorate that is focused on the child rather than maintaining the systemic status quo, that's a failing school.
Oh, definitely.
So through a different lens, we need to look at what happens to our young people and ask ourselves the question, which bit of the jigsaw am I, so that when we put all those bits of the jigsaw together, we can see the bigger picture with and for our children.
Oh, I love that. But do you think, I love what you're saying. I completely agree with everything. But, as I'm just thinking, if you're a teacher or if you're working in the education field, like maybe you might think, you just have to carry on and do what the majority are doing because you just want to do the easiest for you. Like, and you might even think, oh, even if I do something different, nothing's going to change. Because I think a lot of teachers might think that. Yeah.
I think it's slightly different. I would argue that in schools like that, and thank goodness they're not all like that, of course, but in schools like that, the teachers are as much victim of systemic bullying as the children are.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't follow the policy, you need to come into, right? So I think that stuff is, we must not underestimate a number of things. First and foremost, I firmly believe to this day that the vast majority of people who enter the teaching profession enter those because they want to make a difference to the lives of young people. But when you then end up in those institutions, in those organizations, where you're not allowed to do this because everything is top down, there is no trust. My very first school was very different. On my very first day, my head teacher, Mrs. Daines at Taverham High School, just before I went to take the register of my first tutor group 3T. Mrs. Daines asked me to come and see her in her office. So I knocked on the door and she said, come and sit down before you go and take the register. I just wanted to tell you that I'd like you to make mistakes and I'd like you to be able to learn from them. But above all, I'd like you to go and enjoy yourself. I wonder how many Septembers in how many schools that is still the case. And actually, you know what? I did. I enjoyed it so much. I wept buckets when I left. And incidentally, it was Mrs. Daines who 5 years later called me into her office and said, it's time you left.
Really? Why?
Oh, God, what if an instant reaction, right? What have I done wrong? And she went,
Yeah.
No, nothing, but if you stay, you'll go stale. And I think you have much more to offer. So here's the job you should apply for. I've already spoken to their teacher in the school and have given you a telephone reference. And I do think they will interview you. And
wow.
And part of this through a different lens thing is that everybody has experiences like that, big and small. We need to stick them in our back pocket. And at some point in life, we need to get them out of our back pocket and go, I remember that. I'm going to do that now. I'm going to be like that.
Yeah.
Why would you not want to be like that? Right?
Yeah.
Why would you not want to make your teachers better? So I think in many of those schools, the teachers are also victims. And it's very easy to say,
Wait, did you get the job? Did you get the job?
I got the job, and it was the largest languages faculty in the country, Winifred Holtby School in Hull. It was a huge contradiction because my school in Norwich was a school with 500 children. It was a brand new school, so we grew. And my school in Hull had 500 children in every year group.
Wow.
And in my school in Norwich, every member of staff knew the name and something good about every child. And in my school in Hull, I didn't know the names of all my colleagues. And one of the lessons learned as part of that transition is that small schools are better for children. And small schools, incidentally, are particularly better for children from disadvantage. Absolutely. If you do not know the name of every child in the school, how can you personalize? How can you claim to know your kids beyond the grade? You don't. And the issue with very large schools is, and people can argue till they're blue in the face, the issue with very large schools is the words economies of scale are used very often. Large schools are a result of an economic decision. Smaller schools, if they are deliberately kept small, in the independent sector, for example, are deliberately child and education focused. They are educational decisions. And people go, well, we can't afford this. We can't afford to have so many small schools. Well, we can only not afford it because we've decided collectively that we don't want to pay more tax. In countries like Finland, they can afford it because as a society, they think that education and health are important and they put their money where their mouth is. What we want in England is we aspire to Scandinavian standards of education paid for by American levels of taxation. And that calculator doesn't work. So stop trying. So teachers are the best thing on earth. Good teachers are the best thing on earth, but their life is not made easy by the system.
It seems to be getting harder and harder. I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
And I think, and it's a very, good God. I in my book, I did this thing about, you get your favorite. I used to do this as a boy. I used to sit and put together my favorite ever Dutch football team, and I put all these players in. And at some point on a long haul flight, I thought, what if I did that with all the teachers I've worked with? Who would be in my 11?
Wow.
And why? And I look at that list of 11 teachers, and every single one of them has taught me much more than I've ever taught anybody else. And I remember that I worked with the head of English in my very first school. It's a guy called Richard Taylor. I loved him. And I used to go and stand. He didn't know that until the book was written. But I used to go and stand outside his classroom and listen to him teach. And I literally used to stand and think, oh, God, I wish I could do this. I wish I
Wow.
could.
What could you hear?
I could hear a man teaching a bottom set Shakespeare last lesson on a Friday. And when the bell went, I could hear the children go, oh,
Wow.
yeah, wow, right? Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we had a good number of those people. And I would say you need to make the time for those observations. So when I moved to Hull, which was a school in a very disadvantaged part of the country, we decided quite rightly that we wanted to offer languages for all children. So we attracted staff. I think it was the largest languages faculty in the country for quite a while, and we delivered this. But there was a miscalculation, and the miscalculation was that all my 17 staff were brilliant linguists. They were brilliant language teachers, but they'd only ever taught the top 20, 25% of children, because that's where languages lived. So
Yeah.
within 2, maybe 3 weeks, I was knocking on the door of the head of English in that school, a guy called Paul Kelly, and basically said, I need all my staff to come and sit in the back of the classroom with your teachers who've taught all children for such a long time. And I need us to become brilliant teachers of children as well as brilliant teachers of the subject. And sitting in the back of those classrooms and seeing those very same children with whom we at times struggled was a brilliant exercise, much better than going on a course, because actually you saw, you witnessed wonder, awe and wonder in a classroom, right?
Real life experience. No, brilliant. Yeah. We've got a question here from Samaya. Hi, Samaya. How are you doing? She says, what's one lesson your students taught you that you still carry with you today?
That at every moment in time, I have always underestimated their capabilities.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And because what we do in our system is we box, don't we? So you're in early years, and at the top of early years, this is what you can do. And then we take you to primary school, and then at the end of the primary school, you might get to level 6 or whatever. It used to be in old money, right? And then you go and do your GCSEs, and you might get A stars or 9s or whatever it is. And then you do it. So we box, and within each box, we have maximum expectations. And actually, what we do by that is we set ceilings.
Limits, yeah.
Yeah. And the lesson became that we need to get to know our children better in order to lift the ceiling, lift the lid. There's a wonderful video that I urge people to go and find on YouTube, and it's called the flea in the jar experiment. If you put that into YouTube, it'll come up, right?
Flea in the jar, okay.
Yeah. And so in a nutshell, it's a scientific experiment, and they put fleas in a jar, in an open jar, and the fleas jump, right? And they jump higher than the jar, and then they land back. And then after a while, somebody puts a lid on the jar, and they leave the lid there for 3 days. And when they remove the lid, no flea jumps higher than where the lid was.
Oh, yeah.
And when those fleas have offspring, their offspring also doesn't jump higher than where the lid was. And there, essentially, do you have our schooling system in set 1 and in set 5. In whichever groupings that we do it, we put children in a jar and we put the lids on. And our job through personalization becomes to know our children so well that we should get rid of the jar, but getting rid of the lid in the first instance would be a good start.
Oh, I love that.
It's a cool video to watch. It's only a couple of minutes, so it's worth doing.
No, brilliant. No, I love it. But also I think about learning styles, because sometimes you can put the lid on the jar just by how a child has responded to some method, that how you've taught them, but actually, and then you think that they don't have a capability of something, but you haven't taught them in the right way. So there's that as well. It's really important.
And it's totally agree. And it's very often linked to expectations, wherever they come from. often systemic expectations, particularly at the point of transition. So the transition from primary to secondary, the transition from secondary to post-16, they become points where we put them in a jar, where our expectations are too low, and where we do not know them well enough to recognize. So I was really good at German at school, right? I was really good at German. But my German teacher was boring. He couldn't be bothered, quite frankly. He's incredibly boring. And he taught to the middle. So I inexcusably, I actually became quite naughty and nearly got excluded. I was at the point of nearly being excluded. And what annoyed the man time and time again was that when I got kicked out of lessons, I still got top marks in tests, right? So so there was this ongoing thing. So in the end, the principal of the school said to me, "This is your last chance. I'm going to put you in a different class with a new German teacher. And if you blow that one, you're just going to need to leave," right? So my first lesson with this newly qualified teacher, Meneer Burskens, I'm just going to dig for something here while we're talking. And so for starters, he walked in and he didn't speak a word of Dutch. He only spoke German, and he was really challenging, but engaging. And then about halfway during the lesson, he said to me, "I'd like you to come and see me at the end of the lesson." So I thought, oh, here we go again, right? So hands in my pocket, blah, 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 blah. I went to see him, and he said, he then looked at me and he said, "You're really good. You're really good. You should read." And he went into his bag and he gave me a book.
Oh, you still got it?
Oh, yeah. And Heinrich Böll, Wanderer kommst du nach Spa. And I took it home and I read it that evening. And the next morning I went back to school. I knocked on the staff room door. I asked to see Mr. Burskens. And I had my book and I said, I finished it. Can I have another one? Like Oliver Twist, right? Can I have more? And he just smiled and he said, "I've been so hoping you'd come back and do this. So what you need to do now is you must keep this one and always remember me." And then he gave me Wolfgang Borchers Lausen for the tour. I became a German teacher because of him.
Wow.
But not because his German was so brilliant, but because he made the effort very quickly to get to know me and then took me on my own path. And if you're a teacher, if you're a teacher 50 years from now, let that sink in, right? If you're a teacher 50 years from now, somebody will say your name. It's up to you what they say, but somebody will say your name. And mine to this day is that German teacher. And I was incredibly fortunate that some years later, I was speaking at Bet Asia in Kuala Lumpur, about 10 years ago. And I was given a keynote address. So as is my wont, I wanted to check out the room, and there was somebody else speaking before me, and the room was pretty full. And I was just going to go and check what it looked like and what the sound was like. And as I walked in, about a minute after I walked in, the person speaking stopped speaking and basically said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the reason I'm here today is because of the man who's just walked into the room." And it was one of my pupils from Taveram High School, James Neal, who by then had become international director for GL Education. And James will always cite me as one of the reasons why he became a teacher. So 50 years from now, if you're a teacher, somebody will say your name, and I can't give you a more important prize, award, recognition, certificate, whatever, than that one. I was very fortunate to experience it. Which was
what did
really
you do when he said that? What happened when you?
I cried, right?
Did you?
Why wouldn't we? And James and I are now constantly in touch. And when the book came out, before the book came out, we were both together again in Kuala Lumpur last October, and he interviewed me about the book. And we had such fun that what was meant to be a 40-minute interview effectively ended up as 4 30-minute episodes because we just had so much fun talking about things. And those, but it's that personalization, right? So make it work for your kids. Now, if Mr. Burskens had said to some of the other youngsters in that class, go and read that book, he might have turned them off. Right?
Oh, right. Yeah. Not what they needed.
Because it's the personalization that matters.
Yeah.
And that's where the effort needs to go. And actually, as a teacher, there is no greater joy. I now understand how he must have felt when I knocked on that staff room door.
Yeah.
I mean, you would go home skipping, wouldn't you, as a teacher, if that happens to you, because you just think, oh my God, this is just amazing. and one of the things I talk about in the book is we need to tell more stories, because every teacher will have moments like that. But because we don't make the time to reflect and talk, everybody keeps them to themselves and gets on with life. But how cool would it be for a newly qualified teacher to hear some of the stories that his or her slightly older colleagues can share? Funny ones, sad ones, positive ones that didn't go too well, right? Because in the end, experience is everything, and that's how you learn. And whether you're a child or whether you're a grown-up, that's how you learn.
What an amazing story. Hi, Gia, how are you doing? Just a lot of people on Instagram saying hi. And Ger says, Saeed, love your conversation. Thank you so much. No, I mean, yeah, what you're saying today, yeah, it's given me goosebumps and everything. And it's just like, yeah, it's like, remember what's important. Stop and remember what is actually important. Why are you doing what you're doing? And this could happen definitely, I mean, for teachers, but for wherever you are in your life and whatever you're doing, just stop and just remember.
And it's contextual, right? So, and the contextual bit's really important. So if I compare the two schools, the one in Norwich, affluent, the one in Hull, disadvantaged. So in order to try to create level playing field. So in Norwich, the children would come to school. They looked well dressed. They looked washed and kempt. They'd had breakfast. They were ready to go. In Hull, quite a lot of children might come to school and they hadn't had breakfast. So you've got two choices, right? You can do the stupid thing and go, well, it's not the school's job to give them breakfast. It's up to the parents. And if the parents can't be bothered, they need to sell their iPhones, and you get all that stuff, right? Or you can turn around and actually say, none of those children chose to be hungry this morning. Not their doing, right? So in order to create the level playing field, we're going to give them breakfast. And why would you not do that? And if anybody says, oh, well, it doesn't matter, then they've never been hungry first thing in the morning when they've landed in the office or started their job. Or they've never been cold overnight because the heating was off. So we need to look at knowing our youngsters, knowing their context, and even before the teaching starts, we need to raise some of the bars for some of our youngsters so that we create an environment that is conducive for those youngsters to go, actually, I want to be here. Amazing. Actually, I want to do this. And I would go as far as to say that I think that the teachers in schools in disadvantaged areas should be paid a lot more than the teachers in schools in affluent areas, because I think they go extra miles. And I know that's going to be controversial with some. But you know what? Life would be really dull without being controversial. I just think you go the extra mile. It's tougher. And if you want the best in an area where it's tough, you're going to need to recognize that in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, wow, Ger. No, wow, is all I can say. And I think it's just about being compassionate as well, isn't it?
Yeah, you should care. I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? So as you know, Jasmine, I was diagnosed with cancer just before Christmas, and I'm going through the whole treatment stuff now. And I go to the hospitals here in Sheffield where I live, and I look at the staff in all three of the hospitals, the nurses, the doctors, the surgeons, the consultants. They're kind of incredible. And the reason they're incredible is is, of course, they're good at their job, and well, you'd hope that they're good at their job, because otherwise you'd be reading them. But of course, they're good at their job, but they're compassionate and they know their patients, right? And they make an effort to. They'll ring up. I get a phone call. My operation's on Monday. I get a phone call yesterday from one of the cancer nurses, and they go, "I know you're getting a bit nervous now. I thought I'd give you a ring. Do you fancy a chat?" They don't have to do that.
No, something extra.
And for me, that's what good teachers do. They will go, "I know who you are. I'll give you a book, and I'm hoping you're going to come back from me." Same principle. And people. So my first question when I interviewed people for jobs, my first question, which sounds like a really stupid one, but it was a very genuine one to anybody I'd interview, was, "Do you like children?" And some people would take quite a while to answer, and you'd go, and I'd go, "That took you a long time to answer. Why do you want to do this job?" Because my bottom line is, if you're just coming into it to go and do a job, as opposed to do the bigger picture, maybe you're in the wrong place, right? If you can't be passionate about something, my God, that's a long life working without passion.
Yeah, and it's not an easy job. So
no, it isn't. But it's a good one.
It's a good one. Mohammed says, "Thanks for conducting the session." No, brilliant, Ger. No, absolutely. I loved everything you were saying, and I just think, it's simple things that you're saying actually, but they're just so powerful. And you just, like you said, you can really change someone's whole entire direction of their lives if you just show them some compassion and show them that you've seen them. Like your teacher did that with you with the German. It completely took you on a whole another.
It's a role model thing, Many children, especially some of the younger ones, many children want to be like their teacher. What a compliment! How brilliant! So we just need to look at it in that way. And children who need role models, some do that more than others. We need to supply that. And the role model is not just how good is my German, but the role model is how good am I interacting with you, so that you
totally. That's much more important. But again, I could talk with you for hours and hours, but we have to go as time is up. But is there anything else you want to say before we go, and how can people find you?
So there's a website, gergraus.com. You can buy the book on the post.
If you can put your website on the post and the link to your book on the LinkedIn post after this.
We can do that. So, but actually, they can. If you buy the book on my website, you get a discount, basically. So,
okay.
So that's that. Yeah, there is one thing that I'd like to leave with. My favorite book is a book called The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and The Little Prince has a quote in it, which is my favorite quote. And the quote is that all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it. And I think part of our job is, and part of the job of a podcast like this, is to increase the number of the few, right? We need to remember. So when we condemn children, as we do, the youth of today, actually the youth of today, in many ways, is really not very different to the youth of yesterday. And you better remember it. So when people go, my kids are, my daughter comes home from school and immediately she's on her phone and she's FaceTiming the mates she's just left behind. I did exactly the same 50 years ago, except that the phone was attached to the wall and it was much more expensive to make the calls.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I love that phrase. If you can put that on the post as well, everything that you've said, if you could put that on the post, that would be amazing. The two links and the quote. But no, thank you so much, Ger. Thank you so much to everybody who's joined us today. If you have any questions or comments, please write them on the post or message Ger directly. And I will see everybody next week at the usual time.